So last night I had a vegetarian chili that I have kind of created based on some recipes I saw online that has lentils and quinoa and black beans and corn and chipotle and some other veggies, and you can serve it to people that eat meat and they will swear there's meat in it, and it is absolutely amazing and comforting and sticks to your bones, and I love it.
Is that the one you made for me?
It is the one I made for you.
When I was out there? Oh, listen, everyone, we're going to put that recipe up on our site sometime. It is an amazing recipe. You really have to try it.
Yeah, so totally check our website. We have a recipe section on youwon'tbelievewhatIate.com, and we'll keep updating it as we go with random recipes as well as ones we talk about in the podcast. So definitely go and take a check because some of them are really great.
Last night, I went out to an all-you-can-eat place, and I got all-you-can-eat crabs and shrimp.
Wow, that's good. If you're going to do all-you-can-eat, get expensive shit. That's a good idea. Uh-huh.
Right? You know what kind of crabs I got? The kind you eat. Sorry.
Rick and I have this joke
listening?
Because for years he would say, I got crabs, and I would be like, you did? And he would go, the kind you eat. I can't even say it without us sounding like the biggest dorks in the world, but it's funny to us.
Just know that the joke is like 20 years old. Just know that.
Like it was funny once and now it's just a habit. So you got crabs, the kind you eat. Hello, and welcome to the first half of our two-part series on the addictive aspects of food. I'm Kate DeVore.
And I'm Rick Fiore. And this is our ongoing conversation about food, health, weight management, and our endeavor to be and stay healthy in a really tasty world.
In this episode, we're going to talk about the unholy trinity of sugar, salt, and fat, the reward center of the brain and why that's important in terms of eating, wanting versus seeking behaviors, and other textural and flavor qualities that factor into addiction.
Kate, since the last time we talked, how did it go for you as far as the intentions you set?
Well, my plan was to be aware of what I was eating and how I was feeling around what I was eating and all of that. And to a certain extent, I succeeded. I succeeded in doing that when I was alone, and I didn't even remember to try to do it when I was with other people. So it was a mixed bag, I would say. How about yours? What was your intention? How'd you do?
My intention was to be sort of more mindful about everything, and in particular in relation to when I went out to eat. And yeah, I sort of failed miserably.
I think I remember you saying your plan was actually to limit your opportunities to eat comfort food. So that didn't go so well?
No, it didn't, because I tried to steer. A lot of times when we went out, I tried to steer the location of where we would go, where I knew I would be able to optimize my right choices. And that really just didn't happen at all, to be honest.
Well, it's impressive that you at least thought about that and tried.
Yeah, totally. And either that happened because the place I lined up we couldn't get into, or whatever, plans changing at the last minute. And then I also suffered a lot too on that whole awareness thing, that I suffered a lot. Like once we got out to these places, I'm halfway through a meal. It's halfway down my gullet, even more than halfway. And I'm like, how the hell did that happen yet again? That I completely forgot. Like it's this whole thing, I'm going to be super aware going out and when I go out and what happens. And then as soon as I get out, it all goes to hell in a handbasket. And also just the fact that happens a lot of times, as much as I want to control it, I'm very prone to suggestions and I'm very prone to peer pressure. That the moment someone calls and says, hey, you want to go out? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And then of course afterwards I'm like, oh yeah, right. Wasn't supposed to do that as much.
Yeah. And the thing for me that's tricky is, since my plan was to be aware of what I was feeling, sometimes when I did get aware of what I was feeling, my response would be like, okay, well, to hell with that. And I would still just move forward.
Wow.
Particularly when I was with people. Right. Yeah, so I have to reframe that, especially now as we are moving into the holidays. We are airing these episodes out of order. So as we're recording this, we're actually moving into right before Thanksgiving. So yeah, we have a lot of opportunities to work on that coming up soon.
Lots of opportunities to practice. My favorite thing, actually. I mean, that is a good thing, actually. Mm-hmm. And then so our next stop here on our chatting is this whole idea of the addictive qualities of food and the addictive nature of food. And all I keep thinking about when I think about this whole idea of addiction, one thing always sticks in my head, and it's always this quote by Wayne Dyer that says, and I think I'm paraphrasing, it says, addiction is never getting enough of what you don't need. And so I always think about the fact that when I think about the addictive quality of food, like what I really love about it, I think about that whole rush that I keep getting when I eat, particularly when I eat carbs, right? And particularly when I drink, wine and liquor, that I just love it. I love it. And the more I have of it, the more I want. And of course, so the more I keep having of it, I never am really able to get satisfied, because that's obviously the whole nature of addiction, right? It's that you have so much of it, it becomes harder and harder to satisfy the need. And I'm like, oh my God, I can never get what I'm after, which is some fix,
Yeah. Well, some of the stuff we're going to talk about later really breaks the addictive sort of process down into the two parts. There's the element that has to do with seeking or wanting, which is different than the area of the brain that has to do with liking. And so the chemical stuff is different in terms of things that make us want something, but not necessarily like it. So if we're constantly wanting something, but never really liking it, that's really, I'm just picturing a little mouse on a treadmill there, like that's sort of an inescapable circle, it seems. Yeah, I definitely notice when I eat, particularly for me, it's the savory carb things. That's where my sugar comes in, because as we know, sugar is probably, it's in the trifecta, the holy trifecta of addictive things of sugar, fat, and salt. But sugar being the most addictive thing, I think, in some ways. Some people would argue cheese, which we'll talk about a little bit too. But I think that for me, most of my sugar comes in the form of white flour things like pasta and pizza dough and that kind of stuff, and alcohol. Those are the main ways that I consume sugar, as opposed to like cookies or candy or stuff like that, typically.
I would agree totally. That's me too. I occasionally will get a craving for the cookie or the cheesecake, or even ice cream has fallen away a little bit for me over the years, and it's definitely turned all back to the things that you just said. Definitely all those. Yeah,
and if I'm going to have a late night binge, I would rather have mac and cheese than candy any day of the week, So I do find that when I'm eating that stuff, then I want more of that stuff. And when I'm not eating it, then I don't even crave it and I don't even miss it. And then if I have it occasionally, maybe once a week or every other week or whatever, then it's fine. It doesn't reconnect into something that becomes about something that feels insatiable.
I thought I would like to share with you some of my favorite things that waiters have actually said to me when I've gone out to eat alone. Is that cool?
Excellent. I'm sure they're very supportive and friendly.
Well, of course they are. My first one is like when I order, this is my favorite thing that someone said to me. Okay, that's a lot of food. Awesome. Thank you very much.
So what is your favorite? So of say sugar, salt, and fat, what's your favorite? Where do you lean?
Well, I think it's really things that combine all of them. Really, I think it's hard to say, but like as the predominant thing, I would say salt and fat for sure. Something that combines salt and fat would be, so again, something more savory is definitely it. But a lot of my savory things that I love have sugar in it in the form of carbs. So it's sort of hard to separate them really. So I think the things that I love are the things that really combine all of those.
So help me out here, because you probably know more about this than I do. So what I know, right, is that when we eat a lot of these foods, there's a couple main things being released, right? Which is like that whole thing that when they talk about dopamine or serotonin, right? All these chemicals that literally get released into the body, and they create this sense of, what's the word? It's like definitely a sense of pleasure. It's very uplifting, right?
Yeah, historically we used to describe it as being related to reward, the reward center of the brain. Yeah.
And for what I know, that reward thing, it's one of those things that, they've studied so much in relation to addiction. And one of the things I've always been fascinated by is that whole idea of when they've done those researches, right? Those projects where they basically will have someone look at a picture of a milkshake, look at a picture of, a piece of pizza, or look at a a picture of a cookie, and they are actually like tracking how the brain responds and how those reward center responds. And then I also know that they also will actually take pictures of people's brains while they're eating, like really high fat, high sugary, high salt foods. And then they'll actually just have them eat like good foods and then bad foods, and then take pictures of their brains after. So I always find that so interesting, because to me, for me, that is the big thing. I get so much pleasure and I get so much reward. So that sort of idea has always stuck with me. It's always been one of the things that I think about a lot. Like when I meet him, like, what reward center is this triggering?
Totally. And there's a lot to say about that. The thing that comes up the most immediately is that there was a study on health.com from the Archives of General Psychiatry where they had a bunch of women, some of whom they had classified as being food addicted based on these addiction quizzes that we're going to talk about a little bit later, right? So some women were classified as food addicted and others weren't. And the food addicted women showed the same pattern on the MRI as drug addicted women when they were shown a really good milkshake. The non-food addicted women shown that milkshake had less activity in that part of the brain. And then the other thing that's interesting is that when they got the milkshake, this is the part that I find so fascinating. When they got the milkshake, the addicts had less activity in the, quote, reward circuitry of the brain than the non-addicts. So
really?
Yes,
isn't that interesting?
Right? So the addicts wanted it more and enjoyed it less. I just find that so fascinating. So what this woman says is when you have a strong anticipation, and then when you get what you're after, there's less of an oomph, and so then you consume more in order to reach those expectations. And then the other element of that is that these addicts also had, this is not going to be surprising, but less activity in the areas of the brain that reflect self-control. So then it becomes this combination, as she says, Ashley Gearhart is the name of the doctor that I'm quoting here, is a combination of intense wanting coupled with disinhibition. So the ability to use willpower goes offline. So at first you want it because it tastes good, but then as you go from abuse to dependence, you begin to crave it, and liking it doesn't play as much of a role.
Wow.
That was sort of mind-boggling to me as I was doing research for this episode. That was one of the things that surprised me. And I mean, surprised me, but then I was like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. But it
makes total sense.
Sort of shocking.
My second favorite one is, do you want me to put this order in when your companion arrives?
Oh, no.
I know, right? Who does that?
Wow.
And then I'm always like, have to be like, no, just me.
Now, did you get the impression that they were trying to be hostile and rude, or that they really meant that?
No, they really meant it.
Wow.
They had no sense of irony, no sense of humor, no sense of fun. They're literally like, oh, he's ordering food for his friend who's not here.
Wow. Okay.
When I hear all that, it makes me think it's sort of what I've always said throughout my entire life. Thank God my addiction is food.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think, my God, if it was cocaine or if it was whatever else you're addicted to, I don't know if I'd still be around. Because anytime I looked at any of that research, they're always comparing food addiction to cocaine, and how it's sort of the same, or people that are addicted to cocaine, like really hard drugs. Yeah. That the effect is actually the same for cocaine as it is for food. And I was like, wow, that's pretty intense. That just makes me want to, that gets me so overwhelmed. I'm like, wow, thank God. Because not only would I probably be a huge drug addict, I'd also probably be broke and living on the street.
Right? Totally. Yeah. So yeah, that's a very positive spin, Richard. That's good.
Well, Catherine, leave it to me.
Totally. So yeah, apparently rats who eat a lot of sugar have a dopamine release, much like rats who are given drugs. These poor rats, man. And then even seeing tempting food for a rat releases the dopamine, even seeing it. So, and then when they indulge in the food, even more is released. So yeah. Also, sugary food that we're exposed to in utero and childhood makes us love and crave it even more. So it ends up having, as you have described, a nostalgic element to comfort food, which I think you talked about in the last episode.
Yeah. Well, the good news is here, Kate, is this is saying we can all just blame it on our parents. Awesome.
Love you, Mom.
For any parents listening.
Well, the irony is I actually wasn't given much sugar as a child. So I came by all this on my own. My parents really tried to have me eat healthily.
You're a trendsetter. Do you feel like, do you get as I don't know if arouse is the right word.
It's a great
you
word.
see pictures or see food being prepared, is it the same as when you taste it, or is it different?
It'll definitely make me salivate. I mean, we've all heard the term now that's bandied about, food porn, right? When people are taking pictures of their yummy food and posting it. And sometimes you see food. I'll speak for myself, will see a picture of somebody's delicious dish and I'll be like, oh my God. And it does trigger something that can make me salivate. It's certainly not the same enjoyment as eating it, but yeah.
Because the more I've been thinking about this, I actually think I get more triggered and I get more pleasure from seeing pictures of it, from seeing it prepared, than I actually do eating it. I'm like, it's so weird.
Interesting.
That there is this idea for me that once I start to consume it, the pleasure just isn't there.
Yeah.
Hey, Kate, what are you into these days?
I have been into Choffee, which is a brand name for a thing that is roasted brewed cocoa beans instead of coffee beans. So they get picked, the cocoa beans are picked and roasted, and then they send them to you, and then I guess I get them ground up already, and then you brew them in a French press, and then you drink it, but it's not coffee. It's a chocolate flavored thing, but it's not sweet. It's filled with antioxidants and also good energy boosting things, and it is good for you.
Nice.
Well, that's the thing. Once you start eating it, you don't enjoy it as much. Yeah, once you get it. And then that comes to, there was an article in a journal with a really long name of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics that said, actually has the sentence about how it says it may no longer be tenable to suggest that drugs of abuse are simply turning on the brain's natural reward system. So I think we're all working on what is potentially a little bit of an outdated perspective on that. Like, it's clearly related to dopamine, but then they go further. And I'm not going to go into much of the detail of this, but they distinguish the wanting/seeking part of the brain from the liking part of the brain. And so they're saying that the dopamine system is crucial for the wanting and seeking, but not for the pleasure. So that's, again, where that comes back to. So animals who have the dopamine system rendered inactive do not seek food and will starve to death if left to themselves. But if you put food in their mouth, they will eat it and appear to enjoy it.
Wow.
But they won't seek it out. So all of this has to do with the seeking rather than the enjoyment. And for me, that's the one thing that I'm kind of taking from this as an interesting perspective of, I don't know what to do with that yet, to be honest. I don't know what it means, but yeah. I'm
definitely more of a wanter than a seeker. You know, I'm definitely more interested in the idea of what I'm going to eat and how it's going to feel than I actually am when I'm eating. Mm-hmm. So I just find that so fascinating. It also goes back to, it always triggers that whole idea in me, that whole thing that, you know, they're always talking about, which is the difference between sort of taste and enjoying. Are you addicted to taste or are you addicted to nutrition? Like, I'm not addicted to nutrition. There's plenty of people that I think are actually addicted to nutrition in the sense that their foods literally have to be a source of energy and a source of strength when they eat it. And that's how they make their choices. And I'm always like, wow, that's super fascinating. And then there's also this whole other collection of people that's not, you know, which I think I fall into, which is I'm not that person at all. I'm the person that's definitely interested in sort of wanting more of it and wanting and seek, you know, going after the taste and the pleasure quality more so than the nutrition. Yeah.
When I'm in a non-healthy eating mode, for me, it's a combination of taste and texture. So the texture, I want to have something creamy, crunchy, and chewy. It's got to have a combination of all that. And then the flavor balance of salt, sweet, acid, tart, and that umami flavor that they have been talking about. That's kind of like a rich thing that is like an additional kind of flavor profile that's come out in recent years. But that combination is what does it for me. But when I'm eating healthily, it's all of those things. Plus, if the food is really nourishing to my body in a way that I can feel, then that does actually make it even more pleasurable for me. So when I do my little lentil quinoa pilaf salad things that I just know my body really grooves on, then those are the things that I just want to eat more and more of when I'm not feeling an unhealthy relationship toward food.
This is my other one when I'm done eating everything I've ordered. They came over and said, I can't believe you actually ate it all.
Wow.
How easy do you feel it is for you to get addicted to good food as compared to bad food, because there's always this talk about this whole idea that, your habits can be changed and they can be replaced. And that if you just eat enough of one, that's eventually going to take over, right? And that's what your body's actually going to start to crave on a cellular level, because all this talk is that we've been eating all of these sugars, fats, and salts for so long. And not that we've been eating them, but we've been eating them in such abusive quantities, right? That they've overwhelmed the system.
Yeah, and that our bodies haven't evolved to handle them in the way that we eat them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so they start to crave them basically on a cellular level. So the whole question of because when I start to eat, I guess my question is, do you feel like you've ever been addicted to really quote unquote healthy food?
Well, no, because by definition, addiction implies an unhealthy psychological relationship to that substance. So when I'm in the mode of eating really healthily, I might crave really, really good food. I might eat a ton of it and love it. I might even overeat on it occasionally, but it's not the same as when I'm in a mode that feels more addictive, which is sort of non-conscious and with an unhealthy overlay.
Right. And sort of nonstop too, because whenever I am really in the groove of being on to a healthy food that is really good for me, I know is really good for me, I can stop. I can put the bowl down when it comes to eating really good food.
Yeah, when I have a healthy relationship with food, I usually eat more in moderation. Although I sometimes will overeat, but then when I binge on something, it's because then after dinner, I might have 2 pieces of fruit in the rest of the evening. And that's what the binge is. And that's still not ideal in a lot of ways, but, so much different than some of the other things we're describing here.
Totally. I also like that idea that, so this, one of the things this always makes me think about so much is, in addition to what the actual qualities of the addictive natures of food, where you were talking about earlier, when you're talking about texture and how you actually like that it feels in your mouth, I actually definitely like the crunch, and I definitely like the smooth. And I tend to like a lot of things individually. I'm not particularly big on mixing all those textures in my mouth. I really liked the individual quality of a crunch and just eating crunch after crunch after crunch, never being able to stop eating chips. And then I also just like eating repeatedly that quality when things are smooth in my mouth, whether it be ice cream or even, ice cream or dips, that I just like eating that smooth quality one right after the other.
Mm-hmm. Right. But the dip has a crunch to it too. So there's that combo. You don't just eat dip with a spoon, do you?
Yeah.
Oh, you do? Okay. I've never seen it, but that must be a private behavior.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I can really combine well the crunch and the smooth. But yeah, it's sort of why when I was growing up, I was always so in love with ice cream that I guess I would just be able to shove it in, and just that whole texture. And I still to this day, I'm always when there's something crunchy in my ice cream, I'm always that's odd. Doesn't compute. Don't like.
My dad always said that there's always room for ice cream, no matter how full you are, because it melts and moves through the cracks in your stomach.
Oh my God. Well, so funny you say that, because this next sort of one of the major things that I'm always fascinated by is that whole idea of food engineering, right? And everything that goes into making food addictive. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I thought was so funny is this whole idea. It's about Cheetos, and they say Cheetos is one of the most successful junk foods around. It says here that Cheetos is one of the most engineered products on the planet, designed specifically to make the brain say more.
I totally buy that. It is my absolute vice of that kind of food. It is my number one favorite one of those things. So I totally am already on board with whatever you're about to say.
And it's thanks for your support. It says the Cheetos' ability to melt in your mouth is called the vanishing caloric vanishing caloric density. If something melts quickly, the brain thinks there's no calories, so you can keep eating until you're finished the bag.
Get the heck out.
Vanishing caloric density.
So ice cream has got to be like that too, because it just disappears.
Yes. I think that's what I think about ice cream too. What you were just saying too. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not eating anything. I hardly feel it. I'm probably peeing it out in an hour.
That is so fascinating. Although last time I ate Cheetos, I had to lay down. Remember? I was so sick from them.
Jeez. I do remember.
bad. It was horrible. Totally. And I guess our bodies just haven't kept up with this psychotic nature of putting the salt, sugar, and fat in foods, because sugar used to be a rare commodity, you know, and salt was really valuable. Remember when soldiers used to be, not remember like we weren't there, but historically, remember that soldiers used to be paid in salt. And that's how, you know, the phrase worth your salt, that's where that comes from. It was so valuable. And then fat was a nutrient that had to be hunted or foraged. And now we have an ice cream sundae and boom, there they all are and all this stuff. Totally.
And this is my all-time favorite. And now, granted, I was at an all-you-can-eat buffet, because you know me, I love me some all-you-can-eat buffets. So halfway through, whatever, I was there for an hour, right? It wasn't even that long. It's not like I was sitting there for 2 hours. A waiter came over to me and said, "Wow, you're going to put him out of business today."
Oh, my God.
Absurd.
Wow.
I'm like, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
I heard a friend of mine who's a nutritionist said that even cigarettes lace their cigarettes with sugar and salt to make them more addictive. Even freaking cigarettes.
They do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's sort of one of the interesting things when you read about all this stuff. They're always making comparison just out in addition to like hard drugs like cocaine. They're always comparing it to cigarettes and basically the way that everything is laced with something designed, right, to make you even more addictive. One of the other things that I thought was really interesting is there's this whole, I guess as we get more and more advanced in our thinking that a lot of the young people now, they're really obsessed with, I can't believe I just said young people.
I can't either. I was going to let it go, but thank you for acknowledging that you said that. Yeah. A lot of
they're very concerned with they're very concerned with their salt intake. So, and all of the junk food corporations are aware of this. So what they're doing right now is rather than actually lowering the salt content in junk food, there's these new things called designer sodiums, which they will reduce the salt content in their products by as much 40%, but it won't take away any of the addictive qualities of the salt. Yeah. Because they say that they're more likely that even if they read this on a package, people are more likely to still eat it because they're like, oh, I'm getting less salt.
Well, but they are, right? Good. I mean, on the one hand, so it seems like in some ways that's better, right? Because there still is ultimately less sodium.
Yes, exactly.
Am I understanding you right? There actually is less sodium. It just, you eat 10 servings of it, so it doesn't really matter.
Right. And they're still engineering the addictive quality. Mm-hmm. They're not like taking out the addictive quality. I thought that was so interesting.
Mm-hmm. And all of those things that are like low fat, they just have more sugar, or low sugar, they just have more fat. Exactly. I mean, that's how it goes.
Because it's the whole idea of something's taken out, something's being put in, and you know it's not good.
Right. Because ultimately, flavor comes from salt, sugar, and fat. And salt doesn't have intrinsic flavor, but it brings out the flavors in food. So trying to cook at home without salt is a horrible idea because salt releases flavor molecules in the other foods that really makes them pop. So the food tastes more like the food up to a point, unless you oversalt it, of course. But
this is why I love you, because you know stuff like that.
I have a mother who is obsessed with the Food Network as much as I am. And so we talk about this kind of thing all the time. But yeah, Chris Kimball, you and I were just talking earlier about Chris Kimball, who is the host of America's Test Kitchen and Cook's Country. And he talks a lot about the science of food. And I think that's actually where I learned about that particular thing, was from that TV show. Hey, Rick, did you know that a study in 2012 in the New England Journal of Medicine showed that drinking up to 6 cups of coffee per day can decrease all-cause mortality in men by up to 10% and in women by up to 15%?
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I think it might have other issues with all that acid and stuff. Who knows? But apparently...
That's heavy, yeah.
Yeah, you're going to live with your stomach ulcers, I guess, or whatever. Yeah.
The other thing I thought was really interesting when we were talking about this texture thing is that obviously all these fast food companies are trying to engineer like the perfect crunch and what people like and what people don't like. And so one of the things, and this is in Frito-Lay, one of the things they have, which I had no idea about, is they actually have a device that simulates a chewing mouth to create what's called the perfect break point of a chip.
Wow.
It turns out that people like about 4 pounds of pressure per square inch when they break a chip. Who knew?
That is fascinating. I feel like if we ever
Yeah.
wanted to go to the dark side, we would be so good at helping them figure this shit out and engineer things like this.
Well, don't get me wrong. I want to go work for one of these companies because they have this whole plan. They have this whole thing when they talk about designing, really sort of trying to engineer the whole addictive qualities of food. They have this thing called product optimization. And this is where food engineers get to work with normal people like you and me. And I thought, oh my God, I can totally apply for just this job, because it's basically the idea that ordinary consumers or people like you and I were paid to spend hours sitting in rooms where you get to touch, feel, sip, like smell, swirl, and taste whatever product is put in front of you and whatever's in question. And then they sort of like put all of these results into some big data program that prints out all these charts that helps them engineer the right product.
It's so fascinating. It's so much like advertising. It's like, what are people afraid of? And how can we use that fear to make them buy our crap? It's similar. It's a similar concept. Yeah. And it's interesting, though, too, no fat isn't good either. Like, so much low fat,
Exactly.
low fat. Like, I have been in periods of eating really healthily where I've realized, oh my God, I've had like almost no fat today, which is a problem. It doesn't, you need to break stuff. You need it to break down your proteins and your fibers and stuff.
Right. And this is the whole question, right? Is all these things, as we know, aren't bad by themselves, right?
Right.
There's this idea of good
Except
fat versus
refined
bad fat.
sugar. I'm going to go out on a limb and say refined sugar is nothing but bad.
Really? Mm-hmm. Why do you go out on that limb?
Everything that I've read and heard just speaks to the poisonous nature of sugar. And maybe that will be a whole episode unto itself, because I think that requires a little bit more data behind it for me to back that up. But everything that I've been hearing and reading in the last couple of years say the single most harmful substance that we ingest is processed or refined sugar.
Wow.
Fat doesn't make you fat. Sugar makes you fat.
I'm going to be out on that limb with you. I like that.
Join me on the limb, Ricky.
Tune in next time for the second half of this conversation, where we will talk about the bliss point, the fact that cheese is the new crack, what the most addictive foods are, and what your hedonistic set point means.
Visit our website at youwon'tbelievewhatIate.com. Follow our fun page on Facebook and our not so fun yet page on Instagram. And if you have any ideas for how we can make that more fun, please let us know. Write to us. Let us know your stories about being and staying healthy in a tasty world, and give us ideas.
And now a word from our sponsor. Well, not so much our sponsor, but Kate using an accent.
Our podcast is made possible by generous donations from listeners like you. Please visit patreon.com/youwon'tbelievewhatIate to contribute. Patreon is spelled Patreon.